Alright, a new Western film with Gary Oldman, yeah, Guy Pearce, Tom Hardy, Jessica Chastain, Shia LaBeouf. Lawless. Okay, so Lawless is basically a Western gangster mix, and it's set in the Prohibition area, where these three brothers are basically distributing alcohol to other towns and areas illegally, and the local authorities are trying to get in on their profits. Now, I'm a big fan of westerns and I'm a big fan of gangster films, so I was quite looking forward to this film. So I went in with quite moderate expectations, and they were met. I quite liked this film, but I didn't love it. I only pretty much liked it. But I'll start off by talking about the stuff I liked, which is quite a lot. Now, this film has quite a lot of standout performances, and Tom Hardy again just nails it out of the park. He manages to embody roles in his films, and he can do a variety of performances. I mean, he's just done Bane, he did Warrior last year, and they're all really different visceral roles, and they're really fantastic. Now, Guy Pearce as the villain is absolutely... he's just brilliant. I mean, he is such a menacing screen presence when on the screen, and I've not seen him for quite a while. He's been in quite low-key films, so it's nice to see him in a bigger film, and actually, you know, being a menacing and captivating screen presence. There's also Gary Oldman as well as in this, but he's not really in it for that long. He has about 10 minutes overall screen time, but even when he's on the screen, the camera is just fixated on him, and the fact that he's not won an Oscar for anything yet is just... It's just wrong, because he's such a brilliant actor, and in this film he manages to prove it with just so little screen time. There's a whole host of like side characters as well, like Jessica Chastain's character and stuff, but they're not really worth going into. They're great role performances, but they're nothing special. But what I was really surprised by, and judging from my intro you can tell I don't like him, but it was Shia LaBeouf's performance. Now, I've never really been a big fan of it. I watched Transformers, I watched Disturbia, I've tried to watch, you know, I've pretty much quite a lot of his back catalogue. I've never really got into his performances, they all seem quite the same, but in here he managed to actually pull off quite a sympathetic role, which I was really surprised by, especially since it's an actor I'm not very keen on. And I think from this, more directors and audiences will be able to open up to him, and maybe he'll do a bigger variety of roles, which I'm really willing to see now. And as I said, the story's about them bootlegging alcohol out of the town, you know, illegally. And it never got boring, and it was always interesting. It was quite like a crime thriller at the same time as well, while being a western and a gangster film. It managed to master these genres quite well, and it seamlessly in a coherent fashion. It was well shot as well. I mean, all pretty much, you know, western films in general is a great excuse to use beautiful cinematography, and this was no exception. The cinematography here was still, there was beautiful shots, and you know, the soundtrack as well that accompanied it. It was a great western vibe soundtrack, and it had not just instrumental versions of songs but lyrical versions of songs, and they quite mixed into the sound editing quite well. One thing I was surprised by, and it was a good point, was how brutal the violence was when it happens, and it's quite often. I mean, it's quite a brutal and just downright violent film, and that's what a lot of great westerns do, like, you know, the spaghetti western trilogy, the stuff like that. I was just a bit taken aback, and so were the audience as well, and it got a real emotional response from it, not just for the sake of having violence. It had a nice sense of dark humour as well. I mean, the audience would go from wincing at what they were viewing on the screen to the next minute laughing at something that was happening. It flowed quite well for this type of film, and it worked in its advantage and its favour, and I'm really glad that they managed to pull off both types of emotional responses quite well. However, I think my main problem with this film is it's very dry, and it's nowhere near as good as other films that are in these genres. I know I said the violence was well done, and it was quite often, it became too often at times. I mean, it felt like every 5 minutes somebody was either getting punched or shot or beaten, and it just felt it was trying to force it to keep the audience's attention from time to time, and not really necessary. And I think that it was holding my attention fine when it was in the dialogue scenes, because I was quite interested about these characters and where they would go. But when I was just constantly barraged with violence, it just kind of felt like it was, you know, the studios trying to push this film towards me. And it also borrowed a couple of themes from various westerns, and one main one is a theme from the assassination of Jesse James, and that's trying to you know, become your idol, which is Shia LaBeouf's character is trying to become like Tom Hardy's character, and I think that was handled a lot better in The Assassination of Jesse James as it was here, because the two never really had, you know, a really solid connection. I mean, Tom Hardy was, along with Guy Pearce, managed to just be really intimidating without saying very little, and he was very intimidating to Shia LaBeouf's character, so they never had a sort of connection, and it was quite hard to see why he would want to become him. Despite how I didn't love it as much as I did, and I couldn't really get into it as I could other westerns such as The Assassination of Jesse James and 3:10 to Yuma, and obviously spaghetti westerns, I still enjoyed it a lot, and it reminded me a lot of a film called Appaloosa, which came out a couple of years back, and that was another western that I liked, but I just really couldn't love. And I'll watch this again, and I think it's a really admirable effort, and I really enjoyed it while I was there. So overall, I'm going to give Lawless a 3.5 out of 5. I think it's a really interesting story. I think it's got, you know, some really interesting set pieces and moments, and I think the performances across the board are not phenomenal. But I just could not get as invested as I wanted to in it, and I was really looking forward to this film. And it didn't disappoint, but it just wasn't. It didn't reach the heights I would have hoped it to have reached. But it's definitely worth checking out if you get the time. And as usual, if you like this review, you can just click subscribe and you can see more.